Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to GovX Digital 2021 afternoon session, and really looking forward to this one. I don't think we've had quite so many Whitehall departments represented in one hit at a conference, so we've not done too badly on that one. It makes the refereeing that little bit more challenging because I have 5 colleagues to work with throughout all of this, but I can only add to the depth and breadth of the conversation. So I'm David Wild, I'll be chairing the session. I am the General Manager for GovX Digital, and for my sins, 20 odd years in central government, 15 in local government, and then a whole bunch of weird and wonderful things in between. So just looking around the audience, I'll start with yourself, Dan. If you want to introduce yourself, and then we'll get around the group.
Thank you, David, and it's great to be here today and part of this panel, so thanks for the invite. My name is Dan West. I work at the Department of Health in Northern Ireland. As you can tell by my accent, I'm not a native. I get referred to as the locals as a blow-in, so I'm a blow-in to Northern Ireland. But I took this post in the Department of Health to bring into the centre the really big levers around success of digital in creating better experiences of health and care, better outcomes for citizens, and a more economically sustainable service for the next generation. And those kind of big levers are, strategy, structures, funding, governance, all of that stuff. So that's me.
Great, thanks very much. Anthony, over to you.
Hi, I'm Anthony Collard. I'm Director of the Chief Technology and Design Office in HMRC, and before that I was Director of Digital Transformation. So I've been at the heart of some of our interesting things that we've done in HMRC to citizens and to ourselves, I guess, over the last 4 or 5 years, which have been entertaining, and enjoying a brief respite from all the hard work of trying to knock out these services to citizens.
Yeah, and that furlough one, God, that was impressive last year, that timeline, awesome. Rachel.
Yeah, hi. No, thanks for having me. I'm Rachel Nixon. I'm Deputy Director for Digital Project Delivery within Department for Transport. I joined there in mid-pandemic, so I've never met anyone who works there in real life. Formerly, I was working as part of DEFRA Digital's team, leading international trade services for EU exit, so delivering citizen-facing services, and now coming into Department for Transport as we deliver out similar things for our citizens there.
Great, thanks very much, Rachel. And Daniel.
Yeah, hi everyone, and great to be here. I'm Dan Wintercross, but for ease, I'll be Daniel Wintercross, given we've got many DWs on the call today. I'm a product director at the NHS Test and Trace programme. I've been in role for just over 3 months, so I'm responsible for the Trace portfolio, but on my plate right now is international travel and borders, so 17th of May next Monday. Obviously a key date for us, so very much tied up in that. I've just moved directly from Department of International Trade, so just like Rachel, working very closely on EU exit and all of that, what that entails for the last 2.5 years. So I thought, well, what more challenge could there be? So to join the COVID response. So that's me. So great to be here.
Great, thanks, Daniel. And last but not least, Luke, sharer of old property. Carry on.
Thank you very much. Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Luke Morton. I'm Chief Technology Officer at MadeTech. I'm lucky enough as a supplier of public sector to be working across all of many different organisations and helping digitise government, but also crucially starting to tackle legacy across government too. And yeah, really excited to talk about how we can continue accelerating delivery and how to do that healthily today.
Great, and I think, the title of the session, Accelerating Government, I mean, what have we been through in the last year? I mean, I think we've redefined acceleration in all sorts of wonderful ways. So just picking up on the first point and kind of building on that, the pressing urgency that everything hit us with in March last year, I mean, I think nobody expected it to go the way it went, as we know. But can you tell us, each of you, how did your organisation respond to this and to accelerate delivery? And what was it that made that acceleration possible, given the track record of government in other regards previously? Dan.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've written down just in a few notes here 8 things that we've done, and I guess in further iterations of your questions here, David, we might dip into some of them in a little bit more detail. But I'll start with hard work. The last 14 months has been incredibly hard. I have the brilliant experience of being part of the health and care sector during this pandemic response, and it has been incredibly hard. The civil servants, frontline clinicians, and everybody in between has just been pulling the stops out left, right, and centre, and it's been a brilliant thing to be part of. But it's bloody exhausting. The second point I've got is I wrote down single focus, but I think it's probably really clear strategic focus on a small number of important things, and then galvanizing large groups of people around what is a really clear set of individual strategic priorities. My third point is a little bit about removing bureaucracy, trying to take long chains of activity that really reflect how things get done in government, and take appropriately take some of those bureaucratic steps out in order to be able to get stuff done. Not removing the importance of business cases and good probity and governance, but at least trying to take significant steps in accelerating bureaucratic processes. And then amongst that, my fourth point is around changing our attitude to risk a little bit. So moving forward a little bit faster and taking on a little bit more risk, and changing the way we share risk with vendors in the private sector has allowed us to move forward a little bit more quickly. And while sometimes there have been mistakes, in average, I think that's been of benefit to citizens and has been a more efficient use of public money. There's then a couple of really obvious things that I'll say in the digital space. We've used new delivery techniques, particularly agile, more so than we had done in health and care in Northern Ireland before, and new, faster to deliver technologies like cloud. Colleagues around this call will have much more to say on that than me, given that we're pretty early in our cloud and agile journey in health and care in Northern Ireland, but they have been really important parts of our experience. My seventh point is about information governance, and this I might get into in a little bit more detail, but it is incredibly hard to work within the information governance frameworks and documentation that we apply to ourselves for good, appropriate, privacy-preserving reasons. But there's some stuff that we've done recently that has allowed us to move more quickly, but that's not sustainable. And maybe, David, we can come on to that in a little bit. And then finally, for me, and others will expand on this, intra-sector, intersector, and international collaboration. We've done lots across our agencies within healthcare, across government departments in Northern Ireland, and certainly between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland, in protecting that epidemiological unit of the island of Ireland from the impact of the virus. So busy times, and those are my 8 points.
No, brilliant. And just moving on to Anthony, I mean, you know, watching HMRC go for it and keeping the economy alive. Good to hear more about, you know, what did you do?
I think the first thing we did was run around with our hair on fire for a little bit, to be honest, David. It was quite interesting. I mean, we had 3 very big asks straight off the bat. We had the furlough scheme, we had the self-employment income support scheme a bit latterly. We then had, obviously, Eat Out to Help Out, which is not something you would normally associate with your tax office, but I certainly enjoyed eating out in August. And at the same time, we had, obviously, EU exit, because we're heavily at the back of that. We're quite lucky in HMRC. We started our digital journey back in 2015, and with colleagues, we built a really solid cloud-based platform that gave us the capability to deliver in an agile way. I think the thing that happened for us was that all the things that Dan was talking about, that timeline around decision making got shorter. The right people were in the rooms to make the right decisions at the right time. And for me, from a technologist point of view, but also somebody who's worked in the business, now, I was allowed in the room to work with policy colleagues on what the policy looked like, which then means that you've got a better chance of delivering something that will work rather than something that looks good on paper. When you deal with it with a legacy system and ways of work, is just simply not going to get there. I mean, slightly conversely to Dan's point, actually, we went for a smaller group of people than a larger group of people. I think BAU focus in HMRC tends to mean that you've got hundreds of people who think they've got an interest in the service. And what we were able to do was actually get it down to the core number of people who actually made a difference, and were able to make the decisions, and then compress those ways of working. One of the great things from me, and I think Boris described as a problem-solving fury. There's another quote for you, which we've got on mission patches. I was sitting in a room with my content design experts and solicitors and policy people writing content for things like self-employment income support scheme in real time. So we're not doing this backwards and forwards of narrative about what it should be and iterating it slowly. It's happening in a session over a couple of hours, bang, there you go, there's 3 or 4 screens. So it really accelerated, if it was possible to accelerate Agile, it did. But what it did do is it meant that other parts of the organization that perhaps had never used Agile in that way were starting to use it. So it was a real eye-opener, I think, for them culturally about what we could do. And obviously, we've been fairly successful during that period.
Brilliant. And resident focus, not policy focus.
Yeah, absolutely. And delivery focus. I think the sweet spot was we looked at everybody's needs out of it. So it wasn't just about what the minister wanted. It wasn't just about what policy wanted. It wasn't just about what customers needed. It was about also compliance. How do we minimize risk? Because actually, if we open the door too big, suddenly you're going to end up with loads of people. And we've seen only last week, some prosecutions around furlough fraud and things like that. We can't shut the door completely, but how do you get that sweet spot of getting the best outcome for as many stakeholders as possible and accepting that that was good enough? I think that was really important.
Great, thanks. And Rachel, over to, I know you've got 2 departments you can play with on this one, can't you? So
yes, yeah, no, I've got 2. I've tried to think of what was similar and different in both, and I think off the bat, I don't think we should shy away from the fact that it was incredible hard work. This is blood, sweat, and tears on the front line and in the digital teams as well. I've never seen departments, running 7 days a week, 24/7. I mean, some of our folks would, this wasn't kind of magic acceleration. This was a lot of human beings really cranking out incredible dedication to public service, and that's from the civil servants and the suppliers and contractors. So huge kind of single focus to get the most important things done. So I think that the hard work element cannot be, kind of shied away from, and just we shouldn't gloss over that. I think for me, kind of, some of Dan West's list were in mind. I think this kind of quite ruthless prioritization we've got quite used to within our EU exit work, within DEFRA, the ability to pause and flex work, getting out of the way, trying to just reduce the decision timelines, some of the people involved. And to Anthony's point, getting small teams, DEFRA has stood up some of the work to support vulnerable people and delivery slots for food deliveries, and that started off with around 5 people in 5 days, and really a lot of focus about taking things off of them and giving them the right people at the right time. So yes, sometimes that small was better, to just reduce the overall time from sort of bright idea to getting out the door, but to not throw the baby out with the bathwater as well, to still make sure this was secure, accessible, tested, iterated. But it did give us, quite kind of classic back to basics with Agile, limit our work in progress, make sure we understand what our MVP is, and the concept of good enough has really kind of landed well. And we've never struggled to find business product owners in both DEFRA and in Department for Transport. Now, the policy teams are so wedded to getting their outcomes quickly that people don't say, oh, I've got a day job, I can't be the product owner. There's like, I want to be the product owner because I want this outcome and I want it really quickly. I want to work with you. So yeah, I think across both departments, I've seen kind of Agile and digital outcomes being really at the heart of policy delivery, which has been really nice as someone on the digital side to see.
Yeah, and no one can say this stuff hasn't scaled.
Yeah, no, the performance has been phenomenal.
Yeah, across the board. Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting one. Obviously, drawing upon the points that Dan and Rachel mentioned as well. I think Anthony made a key point, which is around speaking with 3 or 4 months experience in test and trace, is around our engagement with policy colleagues. So clearly, test and trace has to react basically literally on a daily basis, and obviously from a digital infrastructure perspective, what does that mean for us? How do we know we're delivering the right tools and infrastructure that are going to ultimately meet user needs in a very complex and fluid environment? Obviously, one of the answers is we need to work very, very closely with policy colleagues. And I think it's not just a case of being handed over the metaphorical kind of policy paper and seeing what advice has gone up to ministers, and then we have to deal with it. I think it's an obvious point, but it's how do we make sure we're in the conversation early on? And it has been touched on, but we can challenge that because we're coming from it from a different perspective. We're looking, well, actually, what do you really mean by actually landing that with small, medium enterprise business owners that need this support, for example, or what do you mean by local regions in different parts of the country? Well, is the service we're building going to be fit for purpose and scalable in that space, or is it essentially going to be superseded by new policy advice in a month? And how do we make sure we build in a sustainable way that we're not just throwing stuff away, but actually we're reusing as much as possible? And that's essentially been the only way that Test and Trace has been able to scale at such speed. Obviously, we've had bumpy roads, but we have ultimately had massive successes as well. If you think about the uptake of the app, with 23 million plus users as well. So, but yeah, I think they're the probably main key points I'd touch upon.
Brilliant. And I want to dig into the streamlined decision bit on our next round in just a sec. Luke, on the other side, government departments pointing up and saying, "Magic this up tomorrow, please." What do you do about it?
Look, to be honest, my background's in startups, and and coming to the public sector, things feeling slower, and over this last year, it's felt a bit like being in a tech startup to a certain degree, in terms of appetite for risk, in terms of wanting to build small MVPs, prototypes. We've been involved, like getting services with Hackney Council, so business loans out to businesses, supporting Department for Education on remote education, but also building virtual visiting services for trusts, hospitals, to connect loved ones with patients who couldn't have visitors, and being able to build these things in that service we built in 48 hours and had tested on wards the next week. And so this kind of experimentation and willingness to play small bets. These are small bets; they're not expensive bets, but and that appetite to test out ideas and to learn and iterate, and not everything has to be uncovered in the discovery up front. We can uncover a little bit, build a little bit of a view on what we want to experiment with, what are our solution hypotheses, but then let's start testing them, let's start building them, and we can continue doing user research throughout. And this is the thing, like, it's really exciting to galvanize teams around outcomes and around that excitement and pace, and we'll come on to it, but I think that can be done in healthy ways, and this isn't about recreating kind of toxic tech startup cultures. There's a middle path here, and I think this has just opened our eyes to that a little bit.
No, it's really good, and actually I want to play in all of that stuff. And Dan, come right back to one of the points you raised earlier. You mentioned IG, information governance. What we have had in the last year is the ability to bypass a lot of what is used around decision making, and we have streamlined it. Is it sustainable? How do we succeed? How are we going to take this forward in an environment where we don't have emergency legislation? Dan.
Yeah, let me just take that IG point, because I did want to share with the group and the audience a couple of thoughts on that. I think everybody knows this, but just for those that maybe aren't so clear on it, healthcare as an ecosystem is a bit like an iceberg. If the department is just the tip of the iceberg, actually the majority of the delivery work happens in arm's length bodies and provider organizations. So IG in that context is fairly complex, because the individual accountabilities and data protection officers and senior information risk officers in those organizations, they have control of the data, particularly if they are a data controller in the true sense. The experience that Rachel talked about, where she found, from a business perspective, finding product owners was relatively straightforward. We didn't have the same experience, and I'll bring it back to IG in a minute, in that quite often the policy direction was moving so quickly, but actually the technology requirements, recognizing that there's a lead time once a policy has been established, there's then a lead time to put the technology in place to support the implementation of that policy. We were having to run ahead of policy, and so our business owners, both from a product management and also from an information governance perspective, weren't quite moving at the pace that the technologists were. So we found ourselves writing the DPIAs and writing the DAAs and undertaking the risk assessments and talking to the ICO ourselves. And that was kind of the tail wagging the dog in many ways. It should be the business that owns the data risk and the technologists that implement the systems that support the transfer of data that is then governed by that risk and the DPIA. So we found ourselves very much wagging the dog, and it was very uncomfortable at times. So I think we need to, in terms of maintaining that accelerated delivery, I think we just need to reflect on the fact that in that paradigm, people move pretty quick. and our information governance frameworks and our ability to identify business owners and the risk holder for those information exchanges probably just needs to accelerate a little bit, and that requires some structural thinking. You know, how do we get ahead of this stuff? How do we find those product owners? How do we get the DPIAs drafted early in order that we can step forward into these new digital products and services with total confidence that we are securing data and protecting privacy of individuals? So that's a piece of work that we've got planned over the course of the rest of this year when we manage to stop running around with our hair on fire, to use Anthony's terminology.
No, that's really great. Thanks, Andy. And Anthony, the other thing I don't want to lose sight of as we go around on this one is you know, the world of green paper, white paper, consultation, legislation, bang, you know, the 2 to 4 year cycle from A to Z. What are we going to do around that as well? Because, you know, that went out the window.
Yeah, it did. I mean, the important bit is about how to get the balance right. You know, I mean, I think from a technology point of view, technology moves faster than government moves, and somehow we've got to work as an organisation to work out how we can catch up our policy thinking with where technology is going. You know, if I ignore the pandemic and start looking at, say, the border and EU exit and things like that, you can really see that there's a way of doing things differently. And so we need to be thinking about things like blockchain and DLT and how that can come and help. And that probably means that we need to do consultation in a very different way to make sure that, you know, we're not, you know, 2 years of consultation plus 3 years of delivery, and suddenly you've delivered something 2 years later that is actually out of date from where the market's moved on, and you're always playing catch up. And I think that's the really challenging circle that government has got to square off. You know, during the pandemic, all the bets were off, as Dan said, as Rachel said. We were able to move much faster towards where we'd want to be. Now, if you think about things like Eat Out to Help Out, and actually some of the things we did architecturally in HMRC, you know, we broke up some of our what we would ordinarily do. We changed our architectural practices. We put things in different places to create a really good citizen experience. We didn't consult on it, you know. So that then comes back to appetite for risk. What's the appetite for risk in government? You know, the challenge with being in government is if you make one tiny failure, then you're in the middle of a paper and a newspaper, and you're at a Treasury Select Committee. So now I don't have the answer to how we can do consultations quicker, but I think we do have to. And actually, I do wonder whether through this pandemic, our own citizens and the businesses around it are going to create their own drive to do things differently. You know, I mean, we've been sharing, you know, some stories around, you know, perhaps importing goods now in the current world. There's a better way to do it than what we do now. So maybe that itself will be a drive for government to say, look, we need to be a bit quicker about this, because we are now an economy outside of the EU. And so how are we going to be a competitive economy? And you can see that through some of the stuff we've announced around free ports and things like that. So, you know, fortunately, I don't have to answer that question about how we do policy in a quick way, but I think it's something we've got to really address. And I think IT can help that.
Right, and I'm going to throw a third one into it because so far it's building nicely, Rachel. At least you're not in Daniel's position; he gets the whole bucket. So we've got IG, we've got policy. There's also contract, commercial, and procurement. So you know, all of this stuff, Rachel, over to you. How do we tackle some of that stuff?
I think we have been more flexible in some of our ways of working. We've moved to some more assurance-based models. So some of the work that we would have ideally done ourselves, we've not had sometimes the the resources available at the pace. So we have worked a lot more closely with suppliers. So our assurance, not just our commercial models, but our assurance models have had to flex and change. So I think it's probably around how to sort of leverage partnerships. Can I just touch on that, the DPIA points as well? I think
yours to play with. Crack on.
I just wanted to say, just keep picking up my brain. From the DPIA points, our teams have driven those DPIAs. So when we're saying that we've got easy to find product owners in the business, it's kind of to Anthony's point around this truly multidisciplinary team where you're not really seeing the tech team and the policy team handoffs, that we're finding product owners, we're putting support around them in terms of proxy product owners, business analysts, product managers, and feeding them, go find about this, we need to know about this, our user research is showing this, what's your policy view on it? So it is kind of not having like digital in the corner, building the things that policy are telling us. It's about kind of shouldn't move my hands too much, connecting things together. And on DPIAs, our user researchers have actually driven the content of DPIAs with our data protection colleagues as well. So it's kind of thrown a few of the traditional roles up in the air. And it's been really quite encouraging to see how it's the digital ways of working and the digital roles that have helped drive some of the policy making and brought the two areas together. So that was what you asked me, but I just wanted to kind of pick up on those last two. I think the thing for me around commercials is I find our commercial routes as quick as we want them to be. It's often, to be fair, in my experience, the financial routes in and some of the constraints, as I would see them, around our use of contract IR35, single tender action restrictions. So, I mean, sorry, I call them all restrictions. If I was a commercial person, they're governance assurance and due diligence and good practice. But as a delivery person, I'm always focused on good value for money for the citizen. But I have got a job to do. I'm willing to work within my budget to do it. But I think I don't have answers in this space because I don't have that kind of commercial background. I know what I need for my commercial providers, and I know there's a place for them. And I think civil service and partner providers working hand in hand well with the right due diligence is a model that we will struggle to move away from. But no, I don't have an answer on how.
I mean, and something just to bring it all in, Dan, it'd be really interesting to hear your view. Thanks for that stuff, Rachel, around track and trace, because you've had all this right in the forehead, haven't you? So.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going to pick up on the point in terms of accelerating delivery and how we sustain that as well. I think actually, quite frankly, I think the citizens won't accept us as government going back to timescales of delivery where we're looking at, something's trailed in the papers from ministers and then, 4 years later it materializes. And I think, the power of data and digital and technology is that we can turn stuff around much more quickly, using the term agile in every sense of the word, in terms of as organizations, as big beasts of organizations, such as, HMRC, a huge department, but has clearly shown it can turn stuff around, at value to the citizens and to the taxpayer as well. And I also think, our political masters in terms of our ministers also probably have grown used to the speed at which we as officials can turn stuff around. Obviously, there's always room for improvement. But I think, having come directly from 2.5 years working on EU exit and the various no deal situations and the way we've had to navigate that situation, as I'd say, and then moving to the last 14 months of COVID, we have clearly shown that we can deliver at lightning speed, high value propositions for users that meet needs at, in most cases, good value for money for the public taxpayer. So I think actually it's a case of resetting that relationship with the public, that actually we've shown we can do it. There's obviously a question about how do we do that and how sustainable it is, and I think we might come on to that. But I think ultimately we've changed the relationship and we've shown we can do it. Why would we go backwards?
Yeah, excellent. And I used a term earlier in the week. We have taught the oil tankers how to do handbrake turns. We really have.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
in the last year. So, Luke, over to yourself.
Yeah, and I think breaking down silos. I mean, Rachel's point about multidisciplinary kind of policy, digital working together. That's one way of looking at that. But also to Anthony's question around how do we continue to iterate and bring in new technologies and evaluate these. And I think there's a different way that we could be looking at skills in our own teams and how we adapt. They're not static anymore. In this age of new technologies and new ways of working, evolving all the time, it's how do we turn ourselves into learning organizations, and how do we build kind of a continuous learning approach in our teams to constantly be trialing and adapting and trying new technologies. And yes, obviously bringing in suppliers who can help accelerate that, but actually taking some kind of organizational change to how we build skills in our own teams. And we're not just hiring for a static type of skill set from a developer anymore. We need people who can adapt and learn to new technologies and want to do that. And that's an exciting employment proposition as well. And that's what people are expecting now. So I think actually there's something about being able to take these kind of agile, lean practices that we're applying to delivery and actually taking them to how we build skills and continually changing the way we approach this. So I think there's kind of that sort of attitude could be brought into how we build out our teams to solve these challenges in future. And I think that can help keep us nimble, even though we're working in large beasts.
Yeah, excellent, and that builds nicely actually into our last sort of big topic area, which is around government departments. We are at a key moment of transition. Work practices have changed. Digitization's made a massive difference. How are we going to hold on to these gains? How are we going to resist the pendulum swing back, Dan?
So I am going to answer that question, but I'm going to probably answer it from the other end of the telescope a little bit.
Cool.
Somebody once said that working with me is exhaustingly buoyant, because I'm generally totally positive about everything. But I'm for once going to play the devil's advocate a little bit. I've been on a few conferences and even presented myself recently on how you try and avoid what I've referred to as elasticity in the system, snapping back to old ways of working, bringing all the bureaucracy back off the shelf and applying it again liberally to everything, and to an extent slowing things down. And I've been talking about the importance of something unanimously mentioned here today, that's single focus. We've organized everybody around one big problem, and that's brought a level of emphasis and laser-like attention to a small number of things. And people I've heard say that that's something that we need to try and maintain. And to a certain degree, I do agree with that. But the reality is, certainly for my team, and we may be a little bit further behind some of the other agencies represented here in our digital journey, but I have had to take people in my team who should be doing other things in their day job and completely pivot them around to doing digital delivery work. The vaccinations management system, the contact tracing platform and digital self-trace service, the all-island international collaboration on proximity apps using the Google Apple exposure notification APIs. The people doing that work aren't supposed to be doing digital delivery. They're supposed to be doing a bunch of other stuff. And if what we say in going forward is the only way we're going to maintain momentum is by having singular focus on a new set of post-COVID problems that allow us to continue applying those resources to these big delivery opportunities to improve citizens' experiences, a lot of other things are going to suffer, right? The day jobs of those individuals, we're not going to get back to them. And that's about thinking about how we can evolve digital capabilities across the entire nursing and AHP workforce in healthcare, right? That's really important. That question shouldn't go away. And if we ask the citizenry, they would say that that was important too. So we need to be a little bit balanced in recognizing that there's a bunch of very exhausted people out there at the moment, and we might all need at some point to take a breath, and that we need to balance continued focus on maintaining acceleration and momentum against the fact that we've de-emphasized a lot of things that are actually quite important and aren't getting a look at the moment. And my second point, just to finish off, again, being a devil's advocate, is around ways of working. So Zoom, Teams, whatever your poison is, everybody is used to being on at 8 o'clock in the morning and still on at 8 o'clock at night, right? We've all changed to being always on, much more than we ever were. And it prevents you from doing good quality thinking, from doing networking and consensus generation and all of those things that are really important in our jobs that, again, we've set that to one side. And I think as we think about maintaining ways of working after the pandemic, we again need to reflect on, we can't maintain all of the momentum that we've built, and we can't continue accelerating at the rate that we've been accelerating, because actually we've got some things that we do need to go back to, and there needs to be a bit of a balance. I haven't got an answer for it. There should be a really smart person with a panacea to all of this, but at the moment I'm just wrestling with some of those challenges in my mind around how you balance out these priorities going forward.
Yeah, and I see it echoed very, very strongly throughout local government, where they have 300, 400 services to 200,000 people, and how you square that. Yeah, it's tough stuff. Readjusting back to normality, not that new normal thing. Anthony.
I couldn't agree more with Dan on that. We've been working flat out since sort of March last year. I mean, arguably our EU exit teams have been flat out since 2016. There's still more to do in that space. So I think we've got to be realistic about how far we can carry on. That's not to be defeatist, because I really enjoyed the sort of the 8 or 9 months of full-on carnage of delivery. It was great fun, and you could see the traction you could make. But that bit about always on 8 till 8. I mean, the thing I do miss is absolutely that thinking time, and I think my teams are the same. And we're wrestling with some interesting problems that I can't really share on this call at the moment, where I would be loved to be in a room with some of my great thinkers on a whiteboard and solving them together. You don't quite get that same interaction and energy when you're trying to do it over a virtual whiteboard and you've got a dog sitting over there that's snoring and all that kind of stuff. So I think we've got to solve those problems and get the right balance. I think there are some things that we are learning from. So, from an HMRC perspective, I think what we realize is that we need to be a little bit more structured in how we do things. We have recreated a transformation group that's looking at the portfolio of change that we're trying to do collectively. And I think that starts to help us think about almost an architectural portfolio rather than program by program and sort of adding up the things you're doing to create a strategy. We're trying to look at what do we need to do to drive HMRC into where it wants to be as a sort of the most digitally advanced FISC. And how do we take the lessons that we learned in the pandemic to drive that into our behaviours as we sort of shape those programs, as we move into SR21 and start to think about a 3-year funding bit. So I think there are some real lessons learned that are going to go into things like programification and what we want to do, how we're going to do it, how we're going to change our behaviours in terms of working closely with policy, how we're going to, from an IT perspective, how we're going to be much further up the food chain, even in that ideation space. So rather than here's a thing to build, this is how you could build it. I think those things will have to change. I think realistically, the pace of 24/7 over 365 days a year just is unsustainable at the moment. And I think some of our people will break. It has been hard work. They deserve all the plaudits across all the government departments for what they've done. And I'm sure many of them will get them. But for me, it's about if we can learn the bits about being cleverer, I think we'll get more done quicker. The compressed decision making, and our board have been really good. I mean, I know there's a question in the chat. I've just had a quick flick about risk. Our board have been really open with ministers around. Look, we're going to build it. We're going to build it in this way, and this is the risk you're going to have to accept around fraud, for example. Now, you can't get more supportive than that. We're saying we can't be perfect. We're going to do the best we can in the circumstance, and I think if government can move to that a little bit more, then we're going to get much more done. We try and sometimes be perfect because we don't want to be in a paper. So I think there are things that we can learn from it, but we've also got to, as Dan said, we've got to look about. Hang on a minute, we can't do this full on at the same speed for everything.
No, that's really, really good. Thanks, Anthony. And actually, you're right on that question. And it's something maybe we can pick up on the other bits with Rachel and Daniel. Is that question about how do we stop bureaucracy returning as a means by which it diminishes trust, and that seems to be the essence of the question I've seen in the chat there. So Rachel, good to get your thoughts around this.
Around
the
which one, sorry? Where
your departments are, how do we hold on to some of the stuff that's changed and where we're going forward, and how do we sustain the trust that we've earned with our residents?
I think one of I would really agree with the kind of the pace has been relentless. It felt like that through EU exit, and then it went, we didn't know we had the extra gear, and then we found it, and now we're thinking how do we sustain the kind of some of the outcomes and even improve the outcomes. I think we kind of all have admitted here that we've thrown up services to meet individual bespoke needs, and what we're doing at DfT at the moment is thinking about how do we continue to be responsive to these types of demands, because citizens and policy customers are now, well, you can do it now. So there's this expectation that we can go quickly, but not through such bespoke development of individual. So we're looking at more about building portfolios, as Anthony said, around core capabilities that we want to, if in time, reuse. But we are kind of asking for this next year to be a little bit more foundation building capability. What are the capabilities we need that then you can put your services over the top of, rather than we have just developed bespoke individual services, because that takes days, not weeks or months. So I think it's about understanding what capabilities are going to be needed and building portfolios around those. I hope what we can maintain is this cross-government sharing that we've all talked about. So we have the life on Zoom or Teams has made connections easier. The single focus also helped, but We really want to maintain these links that we have. We are solving very similar problems, even if we're not solving the same problem. So how do we keep that cross government sharing? And I think the other thing we haven't touched on today, which seems it's quite a simple point. I think the fact that our teams, well, as leaders, are focused on well-being, that it was our jobs to look after people. It sounds really obvious, and not that it wasn't there before, but it became front and centre last year. We're really pushing people to their limits, and we need to look after them, and we need to make sure we have this focus. And I really hope that we maintain that as the well-being stays on the agenda as much as it has, and that we sort of make more inroads as we kind of take the working hours down slightly. And I think that specific question around the attitude towards risk and bureaucracy. I think a clearer set of organisational objectives, not to be overly corporate, but the outcome delivery plans have really helped. Honestly, it felt like it came from the centre, but we've seen a really short chain of command now in terms of our organisational ODP plans, and then how we've created our digital portfolios that threads to them with kind of like nothing in between. So don't want to give a less corporate answer before, so I feel like entitled to one. But I do think that those more focused outcome-based plans can really help digital teams that are used to doing that sort of planning, and then fleshing out risk in terms of rework potentially. If we do this quickly, we might have to come back to this. People seem more comfortable with those types of conversations now, so to keep flagging the risks and impacts, and people kind of respond well to that.
Yeah, accepting risk, dealing with it rather than treating it as a reason why not to. And I think I'd broaden your wellbeing piece as well. I mean, what's been amazing has been the explicit recognition in society, not just in the workplace, about the importance of well-being and people looking after themselves. I've seen that as a sea change across the whole country, and one we absolutely can't lose. Daniel.
Yeah, I think just very briefly, I think, if you use the analogy of economic growth, of the kind of appetite for always unrelenting economic growth year on year, I think, going back to my previous point, we have been delivering more and more, but I think there is a point of that tipping point, and we can't continue to squeeze too much more than we already have out of the kind of resources that we've got. There's obviously diminishing returns of when you think about scalability. And I think, in the test and trace perspective, there has been the pressure to deliver so quickly. But actually now it's more about when prevalence is lower, we are going in the right direction. Things are looking a bit more normal. We can meet our friends. We can go into a restaurant next week. So I'm call me optimistic, but the last 4 or 5 years of EU exit and COVID have been exceptional, and I do think that things will hopefully get back to normal, and we can go back to doing the thinking that Anthony referred to, and meeting up in a cafe or, God forbid, a pub, to really actually have that engagement. And yes, I think there will be some welcome changes slipping back to what life was like, before COVID, in terms of interaction. And some of my colleagues had away days for the first time yesterday. So they could actually see the person that they've been looking across the screen at, and oh, they're actually 6 foot, they're not 5 foot. To seeing each other on the shoulders. But I think there are some parts of the future that I think moving back to what the world was like previously, are welcome from my perspective, but clearly we don't want to lose sight of the benefits and the insight that we have gained as a result of the kind of exceptional 14 months we've all gone through as well now.
Well, I'm gonna have to do something about my COVID weight gain before face-to-face kicks back in. So Luke, you have the last words. 45 minutes go so quickly. Over to you, Luke.
It does. And I think just on the wellbeing point, it's really important. It's so important. And I think actually there's still more to be done. We're not going to return to absolutely normal in terms of what it used to be, in terms of getting back to the office. There is going to be new ways of working, more screen time. And I think that was just a thing that was going to happen anyway. And actually it's just accelerated that. And so I think that we've gone from newborn to adolescent pretty quickly, but there's a lot more maturing that we need to do in terms of well-being, about how many hours we do spend on calls, like what those cultural norms become. And I think as leaders, we really need to be setting that example and not doing 12 hours on calls all day, and leading by example, closing out parts of our calendar, or whatever it is. Like, I know that sounds like a very in the detail point there, but I just think like it's these small things that really do burn people out. And so I think we really have to think about how do our cultural norms change as we go forward. But just more generally, I mean, we've seen a focus, a move away from just outputs or just building solutions to solving problems. And I think we need to work out how to organise programs and portfolios around these outcomes, around programs, and actually what are the biggest outcomes that your organisation is working towards right now. And maybe that should be some ruthless prioritisation. Just to push back on Dan's point, I mean, there is a need to prioritise, and if we're focused on the biggest outcomes for the organisation, then actually how we organise around those should follow that, not the other way around. And so I think that there's lots of opportunity for learning and taking forward what we've all been through, and working out what that new normal is. That's something that we've all been on a personal journey, and as organisations and teams too. So
great, thanks very much. And so just to do a wrap on that, I think 45 minutes goes back so quickly when you're dealing with math. We've dealt with some pretty big topics in that time. I just got to say thank you to all of you for actually not shying away from it. Always love a bit of banter and a little bit of bounce back as well. So thanks very much, Dan, Anthony, Rachel, Daniel, and Luke. Great, insightful session. Thank you, everybody, and will also be available for recordings later on this evening. So thanks very much. Have a great evening, everybody. Cheers. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. Bye.